All right, welcome to another Storage Authority webinar. So we're sharing 40 tips to help you define your self-storage buy box and find a facility within 7 months. A big thank you to our sponsors, StoreTrack and MSM. These are leaders in our industry when it comes to data, information, and resources. So getting into it, we want to know what exactly is a buy box. It's simply a written set of criteria, specific numbers, terms, features you're looking for. These features that you'll use to filter out and evaluate facilities before you ever call the owner or the broker. So kind of think of it as your personal checklist of what a yes looks like. So why does it matter? It's because it keeps you from wasting time on facilities that were never going to work. It keeps you from getting emotional and chasing the wrong deal. A good buy box does the filtering for you. And today we're going to walk you through the buy box we use to purchase an existing facility. We'll also point out a few tweaks along the way that you can use for looking for land. And near the end, we'll spend about 5 minutes on why now is such a good time to buy. So Marc, let me start with you. Here at Storage Authority, we call ours the Buy Box Plus. So what's the plus stand for?
Well, welcome everybody. The plus is another head start. So instead of just looking at that facility, do we need a 1-story, 2-story, this size, that size? We add in other criteria such as information about you. Why not put in that buy box what you want your profit to be based upon that income that you're making? Why not put some of your banking information in there so as you go through the process, you know how important it is or the value of maybe another seller giving you a mortgage or how much time it takes to get that mortgage. So we add quite a bit that's not in the typical buy box. It's not hard to do, and it gives you a lot more information. You're going to be a lot more comfortable in the end going through the process.
So let me ask you this then, Marc. So is everyone's buy box basically the same? I mean, doesn't everyone want a good deal?
Well, unfortunately, that's not true. If it was, we could put one buy box together and just hand it out. But a buy box can depend on a lot of things, and it certainly depends on how much cash you have. The buy box for somebody with 500,000 is different than the buy box with somebody with $2 million. It depends on your banking. It depends on your risk. Part of our buybacks, we're going to have you circle buy box. We're going to have to circle risk aversion, conservative, and get into some of those details. And so everyone is substantially different. It does take 3 to 4 hours to go through your buy box and fill it out. And once that's done, you probably skipped a few sections and you got to go back for another 3 or 4 hours to finalize it. There's a lot of math involved in some steps as well. But those 8 hours, that's the whole point. It's going to save you hundreds of hours. We've seen it. I've seen it with 10 franchisees that have looked and looked and looked and spent hours when the property should have been rejected in 8 seconds often, but certainly should have been rejected in less than a half an hour and moved on. So it's not the same. Everyone might want a good deal, but what is a good deal to you, Garrett, and what is a good deal to somebody else is different. And you'll see some of that in our buybacks as we move forward.
Sounds good. So I'll jump right into it and I'll break down the 5 categories of our buy box. So the first one's your data and your goals. We're getting into banking and data, your facility type, 10 value-added options, and your preliminary finances. And if you're writing that down, I'll go ahead and repeat that and go slow. So we're talking about your data and your goals, your banking data, your facility type, your 10 value add options, and then your preliminary finances. So Marc, let me ask you, there's one category that matters more than the others?
Well, there's 5 categories, and they're all very important. Getting one wrong or eliminating one will slow you down. And maybe it'll allow you, if you're missing some information, it's going to allow you to follow that facility that you fall in love with, but you should have passed on it. So no, they're not one more important than the other. But the first category, your data and your goals, is very strategic to you, and it's a base for all the other categories. So it is important to be realistic in the first category, and get that category right, because all the others are going to be moving forward on that category.
Sounds good. So as we go through each category to the audience, we'll open it up for questions, or if something piques their interest, go ahead and throw the question in the chat, and we'll get to it while we're going. So I guess, Marc, can you share some of what goes into category 1?
Well, category 1 is the data and your goals. My favorite one is distance from home. So you put a distance, 30 minutes, an hour. It's just unrealistic for a new person to buy a facility or build a facility out of town that far. We've seen that happen, and in the end, it's much more difficult to operate at a profit from afar. So distance to home. If you got an area that is say it's 30 minutes or an hour, but maybe you got areas that are farther than that, in the next state over, because you have family. List those areas. Total cash to invest, and that's listed. Next, you list any cash reserves above the money you have to invest. That's important. We work as a team here, so as we look at this information, it tells us all of it together tells us a story. Your risk level, is it low, medium, or high? And when you're putting together a buy box, especially when you're sharing it with somebody so we can understand it, we want to list the hours weekly you're going to put in to search offline. It's a little bit of a different buy box, believe it or not, if you're going to spend 8 hours a week versus 1 hour a week versus 40 hours a week. If you're spending 40 hours a week, you can broaden some categories, because you're going to have plenty of time to get the job done. You want to put the type of facility generally. Are you okay with a value add? That's the most common. But there's a section in self-storage called trash. Some people love that, but a lot of people said that's too much of a value add for me. And of course, there's people that just don't want to put in the time to convert a value add, put in the extra money and the time and energy, and they just want a stable Class A facility. They want that good return on their money, and usually they've got plenty of money when they're looking for a stable Class A facility. Most of our franchisees are really looking for a value add facility. Another one of those added plus things is, having a LOI, letter of intent, done, written, and reviewed by your attorney. So when that might tell you some information there, or bring up questions. What's the due diligence time? That's going to remind you to ask your banker that, and then it's also, you've got that base ready to go, because you've got this buy box. When you find something, you want to move on to it as quick as possible. So, those are the personal and goal type orientation. Garrett, as we've learned over the years, category 2, banking is key, because we are often borrow hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars to buy a facility. Can you share some of the items in our banking loan buy box?
Absolutely. All right. So on to category 2, banking and data, and really this is what we throw in that buy box, and this is what we look for. So bank name and the date you contacted them. What kind of loan type is it? Is it traditional? Is it SBA? Is it another form of financing? the bank's required debt service ratio. Sometimes you see that as DSCR. Banks often look for 1.25 or higher. And simple math on that, say the facility, this would be a small facility, is bringing in 125,000 a year. Your debt service for the year is 100 grand. They're looking for that 25% margin rate there. So that's just their safety buffer zone, if you will. Interest rate, obviously we've been operating in the 6 and 7% interest rate for some time now. So everybody's waiting for a little relief there. Terms, as far as the number of years amortized, number of years interest only, percent down, the maximum you can borrow based on your down payment. What banks typically won't finance, things like design costs, soft costs, or interest carry to break even. So that's important. Anything else really specific to your situation, it's a critical stage is the lending and the financing. So, obviously interest rate and terms are always important, but you also want to make sure you have a good lender that you're doing business with. Let's see, any questions on that and the banking side? All right, we're going to keep rolling then. So the third category is facility type. Marc, this one sounds pretty basic. So can you explain why it actually matters?
Yeah, the facility type, like I said, there's multiple facility types. And so, why look at something that's, again, something that you should be passing on. But, typically the facility type will be value add, an underperforming facility where we can make improvements. And Garrett, you're going to hit that in our next one or the one after about that. But when we talk about the facility, and especially some of these things will help out a lot. How many hours are you going to put in to make repairs, upgrade, and supervise the manager? So that's going to tell us a lot, because if you don't have time to make the repairs and upgrades, and that's not going to match your value add, or you're going to have certain value adds that take less time to make it worthwhile. Typically the maximum number of stories, again, very often that's going to be one, because typically when you have a 2-story building or 3-story, 4-story, it's going to be much larger, and it might be out of your budget, but it's something we figure out based upon your budget. The maximum net rentable square feet, some of these facilities, when you find them offline, there's no price. And even some that are for sale, they give just rentable square feet, but they don't give a price. So we've got to back the price back into your financials. And when we get to the financial section, we'll do that a little bit if we have some time. But having that, if it's 800 units and you don't have the money for that, you can skip it in 8 seconds. So again, we're trying to find ways here of rejecting parcels as soon as possible, so we can spend as much time looking for better parcels or facilities. If you got the net rentable square feet, you divide that, by 100, which is the average square foot, and that will give you the maximum, or that'll give you the average offline properties. And if it comes up to 300, you might search between 250 and 350. Location restrictions. When you're looking in your neighborhood, the restrictions might be, this side of town is just so poor that I wouldn't even travel in it. So there are location restrictions for some people. For other people, those restrictions are a value add. We got one facility that's going up in Detroit, Michigan, and some people might have said they would have been restricted from this location. But in this case, the people are from there. They understand that area. They know what's going on, and there's no competition, basically zero in the 3-mile radius with 100,000 population. So for them it was a bonus. For somebody else it would be a restriction. And the same for traffic. you know, you can go out and buy a facility that's let's say it's a small facility of 200 units, and they could all have the same, they could all have the same characteristics, but the traffic, and if you're gonna raise rents, the more traffic, the better off you are. So some people, will say, even if all the things are good, I'm not going to buy anything that has 5,000 people in the 3 mile radius. It's just going to be tough to fill that facility up, no matter what my rates are. So location, traffic restrictions. So small category, but it's going to save you a ton of time, especially the net rentable square feet. You might even put in there the net rentable square feet that is too small for you to look at, because some of these, if your goal is to make $200,000 a year in profit, you can't buy an 8,000 square foot facility. It's not going to pan out. So you put this together, but you're going to see, you're going to go back and forth until you find something that matches your goals with the reality of the financials out there. Garrett, the fourth category is value add. We put that in here because most people are looking for that. But it's also the most sought after self-storage to purchase it. So, we've got to look at it hard. People make a lot of mistakes when it comes to value add. It can, a mistake when you're making assumptions can make it a loser. And if you're correct, it can make it a real winner. So you really have to put these things down on paper, and you can't just say, I'm going to raise the rents. You got to say how much, when, how many people are going to move out. You got to get into some detail of each of those value adds. So Garrett's going to run over them, go over them. But really, before you use them to determine what the value add might be, you just can't guess at it. You got to put it on paper, because that's where people go wrong and take the biggest risk. And we probably should say this everywhere. The value add shouldn't be the reason you raise your offering price. It should be the reason you choose that facility over another facility. If somebody says to you, look at all this value add, you've got to put time and money to get that out. There's no place you can just go raise rents. You got to put time and money in. And so you can give a small percentage of that away, but most of it, it's yours. You're doing the work. The last person couldn't do the work, didn't do the work. But with that, Garrett, I'll let you go on some of the value added things that we look for in our buy box. If we'll change this based upon individual cases as well. So why don't you talk about some of these, Garrett?
All right. So, like Marc said, category 4 is the value add options. This can create the real upside. The heavy lifting is done here, but like Marc mentioned, this is where the risk lives too. If you just assume that you can raise rents and add X, Y, Z, it's going to automatically lift your evaluation. So once you found a facility and you have to dig into the details yourself, and an agent's word alone, isn't enough. I mean, you want to trust them, but you got to verify them that they're going to tell you information that they might not know themselves. So you got to verify everything. What a property is actually producing today from what you believe it could produce in the future, and map out the steps. Can I really execute these steps without just assuming like it's an automatic? So going through them, we'll take a look at owner financing. We have a lot of owners out there that got in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s. They're ready to exit. Maybe they don't want to pay capital gains. That's an option out there. You're looking at below market rents. Can we raise them? And you can't just assume if it's the old tired facility, can I raise it 25% to match where the market rate is? There's probably some capex improvements there that if you want to make that happen. Room to increase occupancy by better operations. A lot of these older facilities, they just didn't adapt and evolve, but they they got in at the right time. So, they're still making good money they're happy with, but, improving operations, room to increase occupancy with more marketing. If they're just sitting back and waiting for business, you're gonna continue to be slow. You really gotta treat it like you're in the hospitality business. You want to be the hometown self storage, but it can't be lip service. It's got to be you got to have a good ground game, a good digital game, and that can increase some activity, which is obviously going to increase your occupancy. Opportunities to reduce expenses. Again, getting back a little more lean, efficient. There's opportunity out there with a lot of these facilities that are on the market. A rundown facility you can repair, with the maximum repair budget in mind. So you might see it's needs paint, new asphalt, whatever it may be. You gotta put that capex budget together, and does it still make sense? Extra land for future development. If they're sitting on a couple extra acres, great area where you can add another 10 or 20,000 square feet, or even a RV or boat parking. So that's an extra revenue generator. How much you're willing to pay today for improvement profits that you can have to go and earn it. So you can't just assume, hey, if I do these improvements, that it's just an automatic again. You got to be able to withstand where the market's at and where it's trending. A location with very high population density within a 3-mile radius. That's more rooftops, more people, more customers, more eyes on your site. A location with very high traffic count. Much rather have 25 to 40,000 cars a day than 15,000 cars. You're getting in their memory folder when they need when they need to store their belongings or your services. Boom, they're coming right to you. Opportunities to add insurance, 24-hour access fees, fee or package collection fees. These all add up to your bottom right. That a lot of the older facilities, they never adapted. That's the low-hanging fruit. So it's very possible to make those improvements. So for every value add, you need to spell out exactly what has to be confirmed and what it will take, time and the money, to actually capture the value. And that's really the gist of a lot of the value add, buy box opportunities that we put together in the Storage Authority buy box. It's always, again, like Marc mentioned, it's just dangerous to assume the heavy lifting is done here. The gap to improve it is done here, but it's not automatic. All right, so we'll jump into category 5. Marc, that does bring us to the 5th and final category, financials. So would you agree that most people are going to need help here unless they already know self-storage or real estate math? They'll need some help in this category.
Yeah, that's correct, Garrett. This is the debt service coverage ratio, cap rates, EBITDA, things like that. A lot of people don't know those terms or how to use those terms or calculate those terms. So this might be one area that you've got to study a little bit harder to figure out. Before I go into some of that, Garrett, I just want to go back into the value added options. People think I can just write these on my list and I'm going to take them into consideration. Now, let me give you an example of, you just can't assume. Each one of these is broken down with detail with us when you're a Storage Authority franchise, so you understand if you're going to claim that value add, what it's got to do. So for example, we say super high 3-mile radius. To most people, that's not a value add. That's you got the square foot per person. Maybe it's 8 square feet per person, and but because it's super high population, that's more people we can steal by better marketing. So you have to love marketing. You have to have a great marketing plan. And you've got to have that rich marketing plan, and it has to be outlined, detailed, and followed through, because you will steal people. So higher traffic count means higher population, and vice versa. So those two things come with the idea of you're going to do super marketing. If you're not going to do super marketing, and some people want to do no marketing, and you got to realize marketing is overseen by the owner all at all times, and it's based upon what the owner's willing to do. And you can pay for some marketing with pay-per-clicks, but the real marketing is that hometown marketing, one-on-one type of marketing. So again, each one of these items, you got to pay some attention, and that's why it takes a form to start with, and then 4 hours twice to do it. So when we talk about financials here, we're talking about my buy box financials. Those aren't final financials. They are just enough to tell us, hey, this site is never going to work for us and I can skip it. Or it's going to tell us this site has possibilities and we're going to look further into it. So, it's not final calculations, and we can go over some of that later on. If you're buying a facility that's listed by a broker, this section is kind of easy because the broker lists a lot of things, and they're offering memorandum. They'll tell you what the NOI is. They'll tell you the income, the expenses, the cap rate, the debt service coverage ratio will be easy for you to figure out once you know how much you're borrowing. So a lot of it becomes much easier to make sure it's there. But we put your limit down of how much cash you had to be available to do your self-storage project. So the first thing to realize is just because you have $1 million does not mean you can buy a facility for $1 million. You got to subtract the purchase fees, 3.5% for an SBA loan. You've got to subtract repairs that you're going to have to do when you get in there. You're going to have to subtract some soft costs that you're going to have to make this happen, and you also have to have some reserves to break even. The day you buy a facility, there is no money in that bank account. In fact, the first day you buy a facility, you're on the phone and emailing, texting everybody, if you're going to send in money or payments, here's the new owner's name and here's the banking and routing numbers. So you need money outside of simply purchasing that. And then once you have that, once you have how much of that money, cash that you have can go towards the land purchase because you subtracted out all those other costs. Then if let's say you're at an SBA loan or it's 20% down, then with that 20% down how much you can borrow, and that gives you a total cost to give you to go out there. And once you have a total cost of what you can spend just on the facility itself, you can figure out how many units. You just take the net rentable square feet divided by a cost of approximately 100, and that will give you the square footage as well. So some of these financials just are helping you fill out the rest of your buy box. One of the problems with buying a facility is you finally found one offline. Looks like it matches everything from the Google search or your search of self-storage data, and now you got to go contact the owner. So we do that real quickly because if you call the owner, they're going to say no. I talked to somebody last week, but if you're on the phone with them or your email or your conversation with them says, hey, you tell me your income for the last 12 months, I can give you a price range 15 minutes later. And we have a calculator we use that does that. You could do it by hand. It'd probably take you 5 minutes once you got it down. But all you have to do is enter the only unknown is the amount of income over the last 12 months. You get that from the owner, or you could even estimate it by looking at one of these sites like Store Track. And you put that in with a cap rate, and you also put in expenses as a percentage of the income. So typically expenses for a 60,000 square foot facility net rentable might be 30%. If you're buying a small facility, it might be 40%. And the cap rate I recommend you put in this calculation, or if you do it yourself, is 3% higher than what you're going to borrow the money at. You know, a cap rate is an indication of your returns on the total cost of the building. It does not. The problem is if you buy a facility with a 7 cap rate and your interest is at 7%, you're basically going to break even. So because you're borrowing so much of the money, your cap rate needs to be above your interest rate if you want to make a profit day one. You know, so again, a good deal would be buying a facility at a 10 cap rate. And typically the way you're going to find that is offline. But you know, you need to know these types of things. You need to be able to do a debt service coverage ratio, which is simply the NOI, net operating income, divided by the total debt, because your bank told you, they need to have that 1.25 or whatever it might be for the debt service coverage ratio. So another easy calculation to do, and that just makes it a lot easier. So, you got to, in this section, what we're actually listing is the minimum cap rate based upon real existing financials. And the reason we say that existing financials is a lot of real estate agents will give you a 1-year cap rate, a 2-year cap rate, a 3-year cap rate. And so what they're doing is they're giving you a value, asking you to pay a value today based on what's happening 3 years down the road. And when they give you a 1-year projections, they're assuming a lot happens that the last guy couldn't do. So when I do it, I do all my financials based upon the existing financials. And if I'm going to do anything, I'll do 1-year projections and cut them in half. It never goes as smooth as we hope. And that allows us, to put some kind of value on it. Because if you turn the formula around, the cap rate, the value of a facility is the NOI divided by the cap rate. So it's just income. NOI is net operating income. So that's the income minus the expenses. If somebody gives us that income, we can say expenses is 30%, 40%, whatever. And if we're looking for a 10 cap rate, the NOI divided by 10 will give us the value or the offer range that we should be talking about. And the more you look these over, the faster you'll see after doing 2 or 3, it becomes incredibly easy. It's just the first couple. So, and then why this is also values. So you did the calculations that we talked about when you say you came up with, a value of 2.2 million. So once you have that value, then you're gonna say, oh, I can look at facilities 30% higher than that, because some people will take a 30% discount. You never know. So that's why we have ranges in what we calculate.
Yeah, we got a quick question here, Mark, from Chad. Just asking if we have generic templates and Word or Excel, to help a beginner get started.
Well, actually, we are, as you know, Garrett, we are updating all of our data on that right now, our buy box and everything, because there's been a lot of changes. 6 months ago or a year ago, certainly 2-3 years ago, it made no sense to buy existing facilities for the small investor. They were selling at 5 cap rates of next year's income. In other words, until recently, where more people are putting their facilities up for sale at reasonable prices, you were losing money for 2 or 3 or 4 years. So, as part of your program here, you got to say, hey, I'm willing to, I want to make profit day one, or I'm willing to do that value add. So we do have those coming up. Typically, they are reserved for franchise owners. But you're certainly welcome to email Garrett. We do have we have a lot of this covered in our blogs. But we'll have this fine tuned, and I could give you the old one, but the new one is so much better. I'm sure Garrett will share a copy of certain parts of our manuals to help give you a head start if that's what you need.
All right. So let's kind of transition into so once a facility looks like it meets your buy box, the big question is what's next. That's when the real research begins, digging deeper, getting ready to make an offer. We are going to cover that on our next webinar. That's going to be September 17th, 11 a.m. So next month, so be on the lookout for that if you want to look out for the next series. But we want to get into, we want to open it up, but we also want to get into, why now is a great time to buy a facility. And some of the things I mentioned in the value add is owners ready to exit. They're being a little more realistic. If they really want to sell their facility, they're being a little more realistic with the exit price. And there's a lot of opportunity from what I mentioned about the operations and efficiencies, raising rents, and that gap is your gain, but it does take a lot of heavy lifting. So finding the facility, doing your due diligence, making sure your buy box is all checked off, and then adding that that system and that high end marketing. If you're just buying a self storage facility to run it like a self storage facility, don't even look. You buy it to get into the business, and you run it like a high end marketing machine, and you're in the hospitality business. That's when you really improve the valuation of the facility. So the opportunity is out there now that there's enough owners that got in earlier. Almost like you hear a lot of the baby boomers that have businesses, it's their time to exit. Same thing with self storage. They got in right, but they're ready to hand it off to the next owner. And if that owner is ready to really add the right systems and the marketing plan in place, that's where the opportunity lays.
Yeah, Garrett, if I could add just a little bit to that, why now's much better than in the past. Again, these facilities are being sold, many of them for less than replacement cost, and you might think that's crazy, but that's exactly what's happening. But the seller doesn't feel that, doesn't know that. You build a new facility for $8 million today. The average facility out there was built 20 years ago. There's so many of them were built 20 years ago, and they were built for 1 or 2 million that now cost 8 million. So the owners aren't seeing it as a big loss, and so you can get a good value right now for less than replacement costs. So that makes a lot of sense. And then again, you can get a lot of value added in a lot of these facilities. The average owner of self storage, I read it was either 65 or 67 years old, and they are ready to sell, because a lot of them, they had a 5 or 10 year fixed mortgage. They're starting to by the year, those are starting to come up and being renewed. And so what's a good time to sell your facility? When you got to refinance at a higher rate, when you're 67 years old and you've made your millions. And so it's all coming together. And right now, another reason it's a good time is there's been less construction last year, this year, and even the projecting next year. So it's giving the opportunity to increase demand and rates even without fixing the slow real estate market. But the real estate market also can't stay blocked forever. The government needs real estate to sell in order to pay their $40 trillion debt. So sooner or later, it's going to happen. And maybe it happens 2 years from now, but it happens overnight. And when that happens, prices are going to go up overnight. So I think you're seeing a great price for self storages, and whether you see them for 1 year or how long you see them for, but any signs of improvements to the housing and moving market, interest rates, and you're going to see prices go back up. So that's why I'm excited about buying a facility when in the past we really concentrated on building a facility.
Yeah, the opportunities definitely have shifted. Um, with that, we're going to go ahead and open it up to questions. I haven't seen a whole lot come in, but feel free. Let me just check any like private questions as well. Go ahead and either add them to the chat. Let me mention one more time on our next webinar, the 17th. You checked all your buy box. Now it's time to make that offer. That's really what we're going to be digging into on the next webinar. Marc had mentioned it too. We have a lot of information on our newsroom where you'll see some a lot of information even on buy boxes or buying a facility as well. If you read through the last 10 or 20 blogs right there at storageauthorityfranchise.com. I put mine and Marc's email in the chat as well. If you want to ask a question here, feel free to shoot us an email. We're always happy to respond or hop on a quick 10 or 15-minute call. Anything in closing remarks, Marc?
No, we just it's a great time to be out there in self storage. It still takes a lot of work, and that's the reason Storage Authority exists, to cut some of that work back, to reduce the risks, and get more people in the market while it's a great time.
All right. We did have a couple questions come in here last second. Looks like John, is there consulting with me on one, or I'm thinking one-on-one, sorry about that, or with groups of buyers? So I think as far as like if you're becoming a Storage Authority owner, John, we work with you. We do have partnerships that join. They join their finances, and they're looking to either build or buy a facility as well. If that answers your question. And then Taylor, I understand that there's a lot of potential for buying and existing facilities right now. But in the event that we're trying to get into the market where there is no existing facility and booming new development, this is something you guys are okay with? I don't know if I butchered that or not. Let's see. So Taylor, you're asking if there's nothing going on in that market and we're purchasing it, but it might be booming as far as rooftops getting built. I think if that's the question you're asking there.
Yeah, we look at every individual case by case. If you're looking for is this place better or that place better? Why is one place better? Certainly give Garrett a call so he can understand your question in detail. We believe the best place to build a self storage is within an hour of your home, because there might be an area booming more than an hour away, but the time you spent on travel, if you spent it in marketing on your facility and helping your manager, you would typically make more profits and be happier.
Yeah, I think maybe I misunderstood the question. Marc, Taylor was asking about land. She said they or he or she, sorry, they buy land and build from the ground up.
Yeah, the thing about buying land is you're doing, when you buy a facility, you're paying for somebody else who you're paying for them to find the land, to get it designed, to get it approved, to get it filled up. So you're paying a considerable amount of money, and we're literally talking millions to somebody who did all that work. So if you want to buy land and do that work, that is my specialty. As a matter of fact, I'm a civil engineer. I've designed plenty of self-storages. I built 3 self-storages I own. So that is going to give you the largest nest egg. That is going to give you the largest income and profit and cash flow, is building a facility. It takes longer, so sometimes people don't want to take that time, and that's another reason people might buy a facility. So yes, most of our franchises to date have built from scratch. It's just right now that it's become more reasonable that we're talking about it more and more. But if you want to build one and retire, usually you can double your income with one substantial self-storage, 65,000 net rentable square feet after you get it filled up.
And just to add to that, Taylor, if you're looking at a market where there is no existing facilities, but it is booming with new developments, um, I'm assuming you're saying like rooftops are coming. You really want the numbers to pass on today's market data. So if there's this is a very low number. If 10,000 is the population in this area you're looking at, you could build 80,000 square feet in that scenario. But one more facility comes in, so obviously population's important, but you definitely want to build out your performa on today's numbers. So rooftops come, it's going to make it much more easier for you when the population increases. John asked, how do you keep others on the team from competing with me?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean, the team, but if you're talking about other franchises, every franchisee that we help, they get a territory. We're not like McDonald's, where there's one on every corner. So we haven't seen any competition between our franchisees, and it's actually just the opposite. One franchisee comes up with a great idea, we expand that through the entire program. Even the contractors that we use, sometimes they've built 2 or 3 storage authority facilities, so they know exactly what we want. The designers know what we want, and so you get it done, design cheaper, correctly, and build faster and correctly. So and if you're looking at an area that we already have a franchise, we would certainly tell you. We just last week we opened one in Suffolk, Virginia. um, we got one we're doing in Detroit that's going to it's all designed, and so they're bidding that one. So we haven't had any problem with competition amongst ourselves.
Yeah, and just to expand on that, John, typically whether you're looking to buy a property or a facility or even develop, you'll have a search area in the beginning, and then once you identify that facility that you're going to buy, or that land you're going to buy, that becomes your territory. And then nobody, no, even our owners can't, they wouldn't infringe on that territory of yours, if that helps clarify. All right. Looks like no more questions. Let me double check. Well, we appreciate everybody tuning in. If you want to tune in on the 19th next month, is it the 17th? I'm sorry. We're going to go into now. You checked all your buy box off. Now it's time to make an offer. So looking forward to that one. Like I mentioned, feel free to email Marc or myself. That's in the chat, or you can find our information at storageauthorityfranchise.com. Hope you got a couple gold nuggets from this webinar, and we look forward to the next one.